While this story is about Henry and Claire primarily, there are a lot of people in their lives who have to deal with this unusual relationship as well. Let's start with families. Claire's family is really fascinating to look at. It's basically the typical portrait of a well-to-do Catholic family that isn't nearly as perfect as they're trying to make themselves out to be. The characters themselves are really fascinating to analyze, and it actually adds an extra level of dimension to Claire's character when you consider that she grew up with these people and yet turned out the way that she did. In the movie, we barely see Claire's family, and we certainly aren't given the opportunity to delve into their characters. Henry's father is kind of the same way. Now, granted, the scene where Henry asks his father for his mother's wedding and engagement rings to give to Claire is very touching and very well done in the movie, but that's really about all we see of Richard de Tamble. We don't get an opportunity to see his healing, we just all of a sudden see him better. I do like, however, that we get to see Henry's mother a little bit more. We don't actually see Annette in the book. That is, there aren't many scenes with her. We mostly just hear Henry talking about her. In the movie, we actually get to see a scene where Henry travels back in time and has a conversation with his mother, which in addition to being a really nice scene, shows us a little bit more of her character. Henry's friend, Gomez, has the same problem in the movie as Henry. They remove all of the elements of his character that make him unlikable, but in Gomez's case, that pretty much defines his character. We also don't see as much of him in the movie. He just isn't as much of a part of Henry and Claire's life. But the few moments that Gomez does get in the movie are really good, especially his reaction to Henry's time traveling. Also, the scene at the end where they say goodbye is incredibly touching, almost more so than the scene between Henry and Claire that follows. In general, the movie focused more on the development of Henry and Claire than it did on the other characters. Now, there's nothing wrong with this. Obviously, the story is about Henry and Claire, so you have to focus on their character development, but the other characters are interesting to look at too, and the book has the opportunity to really look at them. The characters in the movie are still well performed, and the bits of them that we do see are really well done, but the book gives us more to look at. Plus, there are two characters in particular that were flat out eliminated from the movie that really added an extra dimension to the story. The first is Kimmy, the feisty Korean woman who is essentially Henry's caretaker. I like this character for a lot of reasons, one of them being that I think that every story can benefit from the addition of a feisty Korean woman. But I think the main reason I like Kimmy so much is that she refuses to put up with Henry's bullshit, and he spews a lot of it during the course of this story. As a child, as an adolescent, as a young adult, even as an older adult, Kimmy has the power to put Henry in his place when no one else can, not even Claire. And the other character is Ingrid Carmichael, Henry's girlfriend and lover before Claire. Ingrid is introduced the typical bitchy psycho girlfriend, and she pretty much maintains this characterization right up until the end of the book, when we discover that Ingrid actually understood Henry on a level that not even Claire did. Ingrid is kind of like the anti-Claire in a lot of ways. She's how Claire could have ended up being with Henry in this turbulent relationship if she had been a weaker person. The story can survive without her, obviously, but she's just such a fascinating character to look at, despite how thoroughly unlikable she is. Overall, the book just had more time and more opportunities to develop these characters into far more interesting people than we saw in the movie. And now, a new category that really defined a big part of this story: composition. Which version put together its story better? When I first heard that they were going to make this book into a movie, I was aware of the fact that one of the things I really liked about the book was the complexity of the composition. It must have taken Niffenegger a long time to plan out all the dates and times and how everything was going to fit together. And I was actually relieved to discover that the movie makers didn't even try to match the book's complexity. Dates and ages are rarely mentioned, and more focus is put on the overall story than on exactly what happened when. And the simplicity of the romance between Henry and Claire is allowed to override anything that might be complicated about time travel. But this does mean that the movie misses out on a lot of great storytelling opportunities. For example, we knew reading the book that something was going to happen to Henry at age 43. As soon as we saw that Niffenegger was giving us the ages of the characters in each section, we said, okay, we never see Henry any older than 43, so something is going to happen to him there. Plus, foreshadowing and the question of destiny are just done so much better in the book, largely because of the way that it's put together. The scenes where something bad or good happens are often shown long before they actually do, and what's more, we get to see them from multiple points of view, which, by the way, is one of my favorite aspects of time travel. Plus, while I admire the way that they were able to take this complex story and make it into a movie that was simple and yet still compelling and challenging, I just love the complexity of the book's composition. I can't help but admire it and gets me a lot more involved in the story. Even today, after 5 or 6 rereadings of the book, I am still trying to puzzle things out and I still discover something with every rereading that I didn't notice before. Because of that, I'll never get tired of reading it, which in my mind is the sign of a really well-constructed story. But what about imagery? How did these stories portray characters, romance, and time itself, and which one did it better? I think one of the things that really defines Audrey Niffenegger's style of writing is her descriptions. On the one hand, she can conjure up some really beautiful images and has a particularly poetic way of describing moods and atmospheres. On the other hand, for as poetic as some of her descriptions can be, other descriptions can be uncomfortably graphic and crude. She doesn't shy away from describing things just because her audience might find it uncomfortable, which makes it a lot more realistic and a nice contrast to the flowery descriptions she has in other parts of the novel. And because she's able to do both well and achieve a nice balance between the two, it really works to forward the story. She uses both kinds of descriptions depending on the mood of her characters and the story. However, it is possible to over-describe, and Niffenegger goes into just a little bit too much detail at times, usually to the point where she's slowing down the plot. There are 1 or 2 scenes where descriptions go on just a little bit longer than they should. Not Tolkien long, but still pretty long. Plus, there are a couple of instances where the book talks too much. Now, normally I don't have any problem with the book talking too much, but there are some scenes where the book should talk less and show more. The goodbye scene between Henry and Gomez is a good illustration of this. In the book, Henry outright tells Gomez that he's going to die. He doesn't actually say this in the movie, but what passes between them in that scene really does say everything that the book did, but in a much more touching way. Now, one thing that I did like better in the book is the way that it described Henry's last days. Henry is described like a dying man. Sickly, thin, and looking far older than his years. In fact, he's even compared to a cancer patient at one point. In the movie, we don't get the sense that Henry is dwindling. We definitely see the passage of time in the way the characters age, all except for Gomez, who looks exactly the same at the end of the movie as he does at the beginning. But in the book, from the day he turns 43, it's one disaster after another. Still, for all that, I really do prefer the simple subtlety of the movie's imagery. One of the things that I loved about the book is that there's absolutely nothing flashy about time travel. Literally, he's there 1 minute and gone the next. As such, there's nothing flashy about time travel in the movie, and the effects that they use don't distract from the story. Plus, I like the little ways that they show us that Henry has time traveled, even when it isn't immediately obvious. Like, there's one scene where all we see is Henry getting on a subway. There's no indication to show us that he's in a different time, except that in the distance we hear some guy yelling that he stole his wallet. While the book had great descriptions, the movie showed us a lot more, which is what good imagery should do.